The 1977 Formula One season was the 28th World Championship of Drivers and the 20th International Cup for Formula One constructors. The season commenced on the 9th of January 1977 and ended on the 23rd of October after 17 races, making it the longest Formula One season in the sport's history at the time. The season also included a single non-championship race for Formula One cars, the 1977 Race of Champions. Niki Lauda won his second championship, despite Mario Andretti winning more races. Lauda did not complete the season, departing Scuderia Ferrari after securing the title at the 1977 United States Grand Prix. Ferrari won its third consecutive Constructors' title, with new driver Carlos Reutemann having a solid season. The season was marred by a horrific accident during the South African GP. Pryce was unable to avoid hitting 19-year-old race marshal Frederik Jansen van Vuuren, who had tried to cross the track. The latter was killed in the collision, while his fire extinguisher struck and killed Pryce. His car proceeded to the end of the straight where it collided with Jacques Laffite's Ligier. There was further tragedy as Carlos Pace lost his life in an aviation accident, only a couple of weeks later. In this season there was some team and driver changes. Ferrari opted to sign Carlos Reutemann in the place of Clay Regazzoni, who moved to Ensign. Jacques had left Ensign after his crash at Watkins Glen. He only competed in Formula One sporadically after this. Tyrrell signed Ronnie Peterson instead of Jody Scheckter, who moved to Wolf. Wolf had separated with Williams after the 1976 season. The squad led by Frank Williams bought a March 761 and signed driver Patrick Neve. The Penske team was bought by ATS Wheels to form the ATS Racing Team, who signed Jean-Pierre Jorier from Shadow. Ex-Penske driver John Watson moved to Brabham, and Shadow signed Renzo Zorzi. At March, Alex Ribeiro bought a seat with sponsorship from a Brazilian bank and a tobacco company, next to Ian Scheckter, older brother of Jody, while Vittorio Brambilla had moved from March to Surtees. During the season from the race at Long Beach on, Hans-Joachim Stuck replaced Pace at Brabham and Alan Jones replaced Pryce at Shadow. Hesketh Racing missed the first 4 races of the season, but expanded their operation to 3 cars. 1976 British F3 champion Rupert Keegan was their number 1 driver. David Purley returned to Formula One, after a one-off entry to the 1974 British Grand Prix, with a LEC chassis designed by Mike Pilbeam. He suffered a serious accident during practice at Silverstone when his throttle stuck open, hitting a wall head-on and enduring a 179.8 g deceleration. After winning the 1977 Can-Am season with Haas Lola, Patrick Tambay debuted in Formula One with Surtees for 1 race and then finished the season with Ensign. Renault entered Formula One with their own chassis, powered by their factory-developed 1.5-litre turbocharged engine, and driven by Jean-Pierre Jabouille. Although compression devices like turbos had been allowed since 1960, they were the first constructor that made the investment into the technology on this level. After securing the Drivers' Championship with 2 races left on the calendar, Niki Lauda departed from his team and retired from the season. His place was taken by Gilles Villeneuve in preparation for his full-season drive in 1978. About calendar changes, the Argentine Grand Prix returned to the calendar after it was cancelled in 1976 due to economic and political reasons. The Belgian Grand Prix and Monaco Grand Prix swapped places on the calendar so that the Belgian round followed the Monaco Grand Prix, while French Grand Prix was moved from Paul Ricard Circuit to Dizon-Prix-Noir, in keeping with the event-sharing arrangement between the 2 circuits. Likewise, the British Grand Prix was moved from Brands Hatch to Silverstone. The German Grand Prix was not held at the Nürburgring due to safety concerns. The 1977 race was held at the Hockenheimring for the first time since 1970, while United States Grand Prix and Canadian Grand Prix swapped places on the calendar so that the Canadian round followed the US Grand Prix. But let's go now to discover a new epic, exciting and dramatic new Formula One season. The 1977 season started in Argentina, returning after a year's absence. It was reigning world champion James Hunt who started off his title defense with pole position in his McLaren. Countryman John Watson shared the front row with him in the Brabham, and Patrick Depailler in the six-wheel Tyrrell was third on the grid. The weather was, as was very often the case in Buenos Aires, oppressively hot, which contributed to the attrition of this race. The track temperature was 51 degrees Celsius. Watson took the lead at the start with Hunt second. Watson led for the first 10 laps until Hunt moved ahead and pulled away, with Mario Andretti's Lotus third, but soon the other McLaren of Johan Mass took the place. Mass had to retire soon after with an engine failure which caused him to spin, and a suspension failure took teammate and race leader Hunt out 3 laps later. Watson took the lead again, but he also had suspension failures and let teammate Carlos Pace through. Watson eventually retired, and Pace struggled towards the end due to heat in his cockpit and was passed by Jody Scheckter's Wolff and Andretti, but the latter retired then with a wheel bearing failure. Scheckter took the first win of 1977, with Pace second, and home hero Carlos Reutemann completing the podium for Ferrari. The second round took place at the longest circuit of the year, the very demanding and difficult 5-mile Interlagos circuit in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Hunt took pole again with Reutemann second and Andretti third on the grid. Home hero Pace took the lead at the start, with Hunt dropping behind Reutemann as well, but soon Hunt was back behind Pace and attacking. There was contact, and Hunt took the lead whereas Pace had to pit for repairs. Hunt led Reutemann until he began to suffer from tyre troubles and was passed by Reutemann. Hunt pitted for new tyres, and rejoined fourth and soon passed Niki Lauda in the Ferrari and Watson to reclaim second. Reutemann marched on to victory. Hunt was second and Lauda third after Watson crashed out. The race in South Africa was over a month later, but Hunt still continued his streak of poles, with Pace alongside and Lauda next. Hunt led off at the start, with Lauda and Scheckter following him after Pace struggled. The order stayed put until the 7th lap when Lauda took the lead and was never headed again, with Scheckter taking second from Hunt 11 laps later. On lap 21, 2 marshals ran across the track after the shadow of Renzo Zorzi caught fire. The second marshal, Frederik Jansen van Vuuren, carrying a fire extinguisher, was hit by the car of Tom Pryce at about 270 km/h and was killed instantly by the collision. His fire extinguisher struck Pryce's face, killing and nearly decapitating him. The race continued however, and Lauda won, his first since his own horror crash last year, with home hero Scheckter second, and Depailler's six-wheeler took third from Hunt in the closing laps. The death of Pryce had shaken the field up, and then before the next round at Long Beach, California in the western United States, there was more news, as Carlos Pace, who had finished second in the opening round in Argentina, was killed in a plane crash. The field, in a somber mood, went to this relatively new street circuit near Los Angeles, and Lauda took pole ahead of home hero Andretti, with Scheckter third. At the start, it was Scheckter who got the best start, and he passed both Andretti and Lauda, with Reutemann going up an escape road and spinning as he tried to follow Scheckter through. The top 3 of Scheckter, Andretti and Lauda pulled away from the rest of the pack, and ran closely together, but the order did not change. However, a tyre began to deflate for Scheckter, and both Andretti and Lauda passed him with 2 laps left, with Andretti thus taking a popular home victory ahead of Lauda and a disappointed Scheckter. The next round was in Spain, at the Jarama circuit near Madrid, where Andretti continued his recent form with pole and Jacques Laffite's Ligier springing a surprise, beating Lauda to second. However, Lauda was unable to take part in the race due to a broken rib. At the start, Andretti took the lead with Laffite following. Laffite gave chase to Andretti in the early stages, but had to pit with a deflating tyre, leaving Andretti to romp to victory with Reutemann second. Hunt inherited third but retired with a misfire, giving it to Watson until he lost places due to a spin, leaving Scheckter to take the final spot on the podium. In the Elite Monaco race, Watson took his first career pole for Brabham with Scheckter also on the front row and Reutemann third. It was Scheckter who got the best start to beat Watson to the first corner, with Reutemann running third in the early stages until he was passed by his teammate Lauda. Watson ran second to Scheckter until mid-race when he had to retire with gearbox trouble, allowing Lauda to close in on Scheckter, but the latter was flawless and held on to take his second win of the season. Lauda had to be satisfied with second, with Reutemann completing the podium. Belgium was host to the 7th race of the season, and in qualifying at the Zolder circuit Andretti took a comfortable pole with Watson just beating the second Lotus of Gunnar Nilsson to second. The race was wet due to rain earlier in the day, and Watson took the lead at the first corner, but later in the first lap, Andretti ran into the back to him while attempting to retake the lead, resulting in both of them spinning out and Scheckter taking the lead. Scheckter led the early stages ahead of Nilsson, whereas Reutemann made an early charge but spun off. The track began to dry and everyone had to pit for tyres, and those who stopped early were the ones who benefited, as now Lauda was leading from Johan Mass and Scheckter was down to 5th. Mass spun off from second, handing it to Nilsson, who then went on to catch and pass Lauda before driving away to his first career victory. Behind second-placed Lauda, Ronnie Peterson completed the podium for Team Tyrrell after Scheckter retired with an engine failure. The Swedish race at the isolated Anderstorp Raceway was full of anticipation after Nilsson's win last time out, but once again in qualifying, it was his teammate Andretti leading the way from Watson, with Hunt heading the second row. At the start, again it was Watson who led into the first corner followed by Scheckter, but soon Andretti passed both of them and opened up a lead. Watson and Scheckter battled for second until they collided, with Scheckter having to retire and Watson pitting for repairs. Hunt took second, but he began to drop back and was passed by a charging Laffite and then by his teammate Mass. Andretti, however, was dominant until he had to pit due to a fuel metering problem with 2 laps left, handing the lead to Laffite, who went on to take his first ever win ahead of Mass and Reutemann. The next race was staged at the newly extended Dijon-Prenois circuit in France, and once again it was Andretti on pole with Hunt second and Nilsson third on the grid. Hunt got the best start and led into the first corner from Watson and Laffite, with Andretti dropping down to 4th. However, Watson passed Hunt on the 5th lap and started to build a gap until Andretti got up to second and began to reel him in. During the final few laps, leader Watson and Andretti were running nose to tail, but Watson held him off till the last lap when his engine missed a beat and immediately Andretti was passed. Andretti thus took the win ahead of a crestfallen Watson and Hunt. British drivers had not much luck this season, so it was a relief to the British fans at the fast Silverstone circuit to see defending champion Hunt on pole for his home race with Watson alongside, and Lauda next. Hunt did not get a good start, and so Watson led into the first corner ahead of Lauda and Scheckter, but as the race progressed, a recovering Hunt soon passed both to get up to second behind Watson. The race was set for a grandstand British finish with Hunt slowly closing down leader Watson, but the fans were robbed of it when Watson's fuel system failed with 15 laps left and retired 8 laps later. Hunt took the lead and went on to win his first race of the season, with Lauda second. Scheckter ran third until his engine failed, thus giving the place to Andretti until he too suffered a similar fate, leaving Nilsson to take the final spot on the podium. The West German race took place in Hockenheim because the Nürburgring track was deemed to be too dangerous to race on because of the inability of the ring's organizers to effectively manage such a huge circuit. In qualifying, Scheckter took his first pole of the season, ahead of Watson and then Lauda, who headed the second row. Scheckter kept the lead at the first corner with both Watson and Lauda keeping their positions. Watson put pressure on Scheckter until his engine failed on the 8th lap, giving second to Lauda, who passed Scheckter soon after and began to pull away. Scheckter battled for second with Hunt until the defending champion retired with an engine failure, giving third to Watson's teammate and home driver Hans-Joachim Stuck. That was how it stayed to the end, Lauda winning from Scheckter and Stuck. One notable highlight of the race involved German touring car legend Hans Heyer, who started the race despite failing to qualify. With two-thirds of the season complete, Lauda led the championship as the drivers went to the very fast and scenic Osterreichring in Austria. This circuit had been modified from the year before, a chicane had been put in to replace the ultra-fast, flat-out Voest-Hugel curve. Lauda pleased his home fans further by beating Hunt to pole, with Andretti settling for third on the grid. The race started in damp conditions, and poleman Lauda led into the first corner followed by Hunt, but Andretti passed both at one corner soon after. His teammate Nilsson was on a charge and was rapidly up to second, whereas Lauda went backwards. Nilsson had to pit to change tyres, giving second to Hunt, and this became the lead when Andretti's engine failed. The Australian Alan Jones in the shadow was now charging up the order, passing both Scheckter and Stuck, and as the race progressed, the recovering Nilsson and Lauda also passed the duo, however none of them could make an impression on Hunt. Hunt seemed to be headed for victory until his engine failed with 10 laps left, giving Jones his first ever Formula One victory. Lauda took second and Stuck was third, both benefiting after Nilsson also retired with an engine failure. Jones's victory was so unexpected that the organisers did not have a copy of the Australian national anthem, so they played Happy Birthday instead. It was not Jones's birthday that day. The field went to the Zandvoort circuit near Amsterdam in the Netherlands for the next round, and in qualifying Andretti took his 5th pole of the season with Laffite alongside on the front row, and Hunt third. At the start, Hunt jumped both the front row starters to lead, but before the end of the first lap, Andretti tried to drive alongside him, but some aggressive defending from Hunt forced him to lift, and Laffite took advantage to get second. 5 laps later, Andretti had got back past Laffite and was again attacking Hunt, who defended aggressively, but this time Andretti did not lift and they collided. Hunt was out on the spot, whereas Andretti spun and rejoined 4th. This left Laffite leading from the Ferraris of Lauda and Reutemann. The latter had a long battle with Andretti for third, repeatedly exchanging places, until the Lotus driver's engine blew up. Soon after, Lauda passed Laffite to take the lead, and he went on build a gap and win comfortably. Laffite finished second. After Andretti's demise, Reutemann ran third until the second Lotus of Nilsson attacked him, and the two collided with Nilsson out and Reutemann rejoining at the back. This sensationally left Patrick Tambay in the Ensign third, but he ran out of fuel on the last lap, thus handing the place to Scheckter. This meant that Lauda had a 21-point lead over Scheckter with 4 races left. Italy was next on the calendar, but the fact that it was Ferrari's home race at the Monza Autodrome near Milan did not deter Hunt, who took pole. Whereas Reutemann cheered the home fans by starting second in front of Scheckter. Scheckter took the lead after a brilliant start, and in second place was Clay Regazzoni's Ensign, who got an even better one. Regazzoni, however, did not have the pace and soon dropped down the order, whereas Andretti was on the move, passing Hunt on the second lap, and Scheckter a few laps later to take the lead. Hunt dropped back with brake troubles as the race progressed, and Scheckter retired when his engine failed, leaving Reutemann and Lauda in second and third. Lauda was soon past Reutemann, and the latter had to retire when he spun off on oil on the track, handing third to Jones. The race finished in that order, with Andretti taking a dominant victory from Lauda, who closed in on the championship, and Jones, who took his second podium in 3 races. The scenario going into the second race in the eastern United States at the picturesque and fast Watkins Glen circuit in upstate New York was that if Lauda had a single point or if Scheckter did not win the race, Lauda would be world champion. Scheckter's hopes looked bleak as he qualified 9th to Lauda's 7th, as Hunt took pole from the Brabhams of Stuck and Watson. Stuck got the best start and took the lead into the first corner, followed by Hunt and Andretti. Scheckter was on a charge and passed many drivers, including Lauda, in the early stages to get up to 4th, which became 3rd when leader Stuck crashed out. However, Hunt and Andretti continued to pull away from him, and, with Lauda running 4th, Scheckter needed something extraordinary to happen to keep the title battle alive. That did not happen, as the rest of the race passed on without incident, with Hunt winning ahead of Andretti and Scheckter, with Lauda's 4th place enough to make him the world champion. After the race, Lauda decided not to race in the final 2 races because of the declining relationship between him and Ferrari. Canada was host to the penultimate round of the season at the fast and flowing Moseport Park near Toronto, and the field went in minus Lauda, who was unconvinced that Ferrari could prepare 3 cars efficiently for a Grand Prix. The third car was for French-Canadian Gilles Villeneuve in his debut race with Ferrari. In qualifying, Andretti took yet another pole ahead of Hunt, with Ronnie Peterson's 6-wheel Tyrrell in third. The safety of the Moseport Park circuit was under intense scrutiny, as the ubiquitous bumps and limited safety of the circuit caused a number of nasty accidents, including Briton Ian Ashley vaulting barriers and crashing into a TV tower. These accidents were dealt with badly, and the severely injured Ashley was only flown out 40 minutes after he crashed. But the race went ahead anyway, and both Andretti and Hunt kept their positions at the start, with Hunt's teammate Johan Mass charging up to third. Andretti and Hunt then proceeded to demolish the entire field, but they themselves were separated by nothing as they ran nose to tail. With less than 20 laps left, they came to lap third-placed Mass, during which there was a misunderstanding between the McLarens, who collided and spun off, Hunt retiring and Mass pitting for repairs and rejoining 5th. Andretti was left well over a lap ahead until his engine failed with 3 laps left, giving the win to Scheckter. Patrick Depailler finished second for Tyrrell, and Mass completed the podium. The final round of the season was in Japan at the Fast Fuji Speedway near Tokyo, and Andretti and Hunt continued their late-season battle, with the American pipping Hunt to the pole, with Watson heading the second row. Unlike the previous year, the weather conditions at the Fuji circuit near Tokyo were perfect, and Hunt took the lead at the start, and Scheckter and Mass jumped up to second and third, whereas Andretti had a terrible start and was at the tail of the top 10. On the second lap, Andretti was involved in a collision while trying to gain places, putting him out. But this race, like South Africa, was marred by terrible tragedy. Peterson and Villeneuve came together at the end of the straight, and Villeneuve crashed appallingly, and his Ferrari flew into a crowd that was standing in a restricted area, killing 2 photographers and injuring several others. But the race continued on, and with Andretti out, Hunt had no challengers left and he built a large gap, with teammate Mas second and Watson passing Scheckter for third. However, both Mas and Watson had to retire within one lap of each other with engine and gearbox failures, and with Scheckter dropping back, Reutemann was second until he was passed by Laffite. Hunt went on and capped off the season with a comfortable win, whereas Laffite ran out of fuel on the last lap, handing over second to Reutemann and allowing Depailler to complete the podium. The Japanese Grand Prix was not held again until 1987 at the Suzuka circuit. There had been talk of moving the race from Fuji to Suzuka for 1978, but this never materialized.